She already knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what to do with that information yet. So she stood in the doorway every morning and watched Ryan's car back out of the driveway, and she held her coffee with both hands, and she told herself the feeling in her chest was gratitude. It wasn't gratitude. It was something quieter and more frightening, a feeling like standing on ice that looks solid, pressing one foot down carefully, waiting. But the mornings were so good. That was the cruelest part. The kitchen light came through the window at an angle that made everything look like it had already been forgiven. The coffee maker hissed and settled. Miso sat on the counter where he wasn't supposed to and stared at her with the particular contempt of a cat who understands more than he lets on. And Ryan was always already in his work shirt by the time she came downstairs. Jacket folded over one arm, moving through the kitchen with the ease of a man who had no reason to rush because nothing in his life required hiding. She believed that completely. She believed it the way you believe in a house you've lived in long enough, not because you've checked every wall, but because nothing has fallen yet. Every morning he found her in the doorway. Both hands, one at her waist, one at the back of her head, steady, deliberate, like she was something that needed to be held in place before the day could begin. Have a good day. 3 words, same words every time. But the way he said them, unhurried, private, like they were specifically engineered for the space between her and the rest of the world, made Sophie feel every single morning like she had been chosen. Actively, consciously, again. She never thought to ask what she was being chosen instead of. That's the thing about rituals. They stop being proof of love and start being the replacement for it so gradually that by the time you feel the difference, you've already spent years calling it the same thing. Sophie didn't know that yet. She was still in the doorway, still holding her coffee, still listening to the sound of his tires on the driveway, that specific fading sound that had somehow, without her permission, become the thing her nervous system waited for every morning before it decided the day was safe. Miso jumped down from the counter and wound around her ankles. She reached down and scratched behind his ears without looking. The driveway was empty now. The sound was gone. The morning light was still doing its forgiving thing across the kitchen floor. Everything is fine, she told herself. She'd been telling herself that for longer than she realized. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in October, Sophie would sit on the bathroom floor with her phone face up in her lap and both hands completely still, and she would think about that doorway. Not about what she found, not about the name she wasn't supposed to recognize, not about 11 months of a life she hadn't known existed. Just the doorway. Just his hands. "Just have a good day," said that same morning in that same unhurried voice, while he already knew everything she was about to find out. The kiss hadn't felt different. That was the part she couldn't get past. It started with his phone. Not what was on it, just the angle, screen tilted slightly inward, the way people hold things they've decided are private. Sophie noticed the way you notice a picture frame that's shifted a quarter inch, not enough to mention, too much to unsee. She filed it somewhere she wasn't ready to open. Thursday dinner. Ryan was talking new account, difficult client, and Sophie watched his face and thought, I can't tell anymore whether he's here or performing here. The thought landed so precisely it scared her. She reached for her wine, put it back down. He didn't notice her not drinking. That used to be impossible. He used to read her silences before she'd finished having them. Now she could be drowning at the dinner table, and he'd ask if she wanted dessert. She said no, cleared the plates, stood at the sink and listened to him move through the apartment behind her, familiar sounds, familiar rhythms, and felt, inexplicably, like she was listening to a recording of her own life. Saturday morning, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sophie was already awake, staring at the ceiling. She didn't reach for it, didn't need to. The buzzing alone was enough, that small electric pulse hitting the wood like a second heartbeat in the room. She lay perfectly still and breathed. Then she got up, made coffee, didn't say anything about the phone, didn't say anything about the dinner, didn't say anything about the recording. Ryan came downstairs, found her in the doorway. Same hands, same lean, same 3 words. But this time, his eyes moved to his jacket on the hook before she'd even stepped back. "Have a good day." Sophie smiled. She was already very far away. She wasn't looking for anything. That's the part she'll never stop turning over. His phone was screen up on the counter, unlocked. She picked it up to move it, just to move it, and a name she half recognized sat at the top of an open thread like it had been waiting for her specifically. Her thumb hovered. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The coffee maker hissed. Outside, a car passed. The whole ordinary world continued at full volume while Sophie stood in her socks on the kitchen tile and made the only decision that would split her life into a before and after. She read everything, slowly, standing completely still the way you stand when something is happening that your body understands before your mind does. 11 months. She counted back without meaning to her birthday, Christmas, the weekend they drove 4 hours to see the coast, and he held her hand across the gearshift the entire way. She put the phone back, precisely, exactly where it was. Then she turned on the tap and held both hands under cold water until she could feel them again. She was still standing there when she decided, not tonight, not because she was afraid, because she needed to know what she looked like on the other side of this first, who she was going to be before she let him see her break. Ryan's key turned in the lock at 6:14. "Hey you, easy, warm," the voice of a man with nothing to confess. Sophie turned from the stove, met his eyes. "Hey." She held his gaze exactly 1 second longer than normal. He didn't notice. She cataloged that too, filed it next to 11 months, next to the coast, next to every morning in the doorway. Then she handed him a bowl and sat down across from a stranger wearing her boyfriend's face. He took 2 bags. Sophie had expected more. 4 years should occupy more space than 2 bags, and a drive she wasn't invited to witness. But Ryan moved through the apartment with the quiet efficiency of someone who had mentally packed weeks ago. He knew exactly what was his. That precision hurt in a way she hadn't anticipated. At the door, he turned and looked at her with an expression she recognized as genuine, regret without apology, which is the cruelest combination a face can arrange. She held the doorframe, said nothing, watched his car until the street was just a street again. The first week she functioned perfectly, answered emails, fed miso, bought groceries, told exactly 2 people, and used the word fine so many times it stopped meaning anything. She slept on her side of the bed without deciding to, body still honoring an architecture that no longer existed, making room for someone already gone. It was the running shoes that finally broke her. His still by the door. She'd moved around them for 9 days without touching them, some wordless negotiation with herself she couldn't explain. On the 9th evening, she picked one up. Just one. It was heavier than she expected. She stood in the hallway holding a single running shoe and finally completely came apart. Not elegantly, not cinematically. Just fully. Miso appeared from nowhere and sat directly on her feet and stayed there, which was the most honest comfort anyone offered her that entire month. When she could breathe again, she looked up and saw the sketchbook on the counter. 3 years untouched. She'd stopped painting so gradually she'd never noticed the stopping. She didn't open it. She just moved it from the counter to the table. Closer, that was all, just closer. The first painting was terrible, and she finished it anyway. Propped it against the kitchen wall, looked at it for a long time, left it there and started another one. That single decision to keep going past the bad thing instead of taking it as a sign was so quiet she almost didn't notice it was new. But it was entirely new. She walked to a coffee shop one Thursday morning, No reason, no destination, no one scheduled to organize herself around. 3 blocks from her apartment, she stopped on a corner she'd passed 100 times and looked up at the light coming between 2 buildings at an angle she'd never noticed. Gold. Specific. Hers. She stood there longer than made sense. Took out her phone and photographed it. Not for anyone, just to keep it. 6 months later, a small gallery accepted 3 of her pieces. Sophie arrived at the opening alone, in a dress bought for no occasion except wanting it, and stood near the back where she could watch without being watched. A woman she'd never met stopped in front of the largest painting, stood there, put her hand briefly to her mouth. Sophie felt something move through her chest, not pride exactly. Recognition. The specific relief of being understood by someone who doesn't know your name. The painting was a doorway, morning light falling through it. No figure, just the threshold and what the light did to the floor beyond it. She had called it after. 3 weeks later, Ryan's message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Sophie was eating toast over the sink, half-dressed for work, miso weaving between her feet. Sophie read his message once, then set her phone face down on the counter. She finished her toast, picked up her keys, and walked through the doorway into a morning that belonged entirely to her. A ritual can look exactly like love, right up until the moment it shatters. Let's talk honestly in the comments. Have you ever confused someone's consistency for proof that you were safe? At what point did you realize you were standing in the wrong doorway? If these cinematic glimpses into real heartbreak and quiet survival resonate with you, welcome to the Breakup Diaries. Subscribe to join the space where we look closely at the moments that change us.